Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Global Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel. Here with me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, we're coming up to the 80th anniversary of the great victory over Nazism in World War II, and there's one very, very peculiar aspect of World War II, which is that the most famous battle of World War II, the most famous battle in world history, among all the great battles, Gettysburg, Thermopylae, we can list the most famous battles, is, however, I can almost forbidden to commemorate the place where this battle took place, because after the death of Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev, who launched the de-Stalinization campaign, changed the name of Stalingrad to Volgograd. And so it's just people who live there, they don't say, well, I live in Stalingrad, they live in Volgograd. Now, over the years, there've been various moves to rename the city, or to revert back to its former name, and it's true that on, I think, several days of the year, it does go back to its to the name of Stalingrad. So, like, for instance, on May the 9th, it will be referred to as Stalingrad, and there are a couple of other days on which it is. But now, once again, that there are moves afoot within the Russian Federation to revert to the name of Stalingrad. I don't know if it's going to be any more successful than previous attempts, but what's your take, Peter?
Well, I agree with everything you just said. This was a world historic event. George pointed out to us quite rightly a week, 2 weeks ago, everything bleeds into each other these days. Up until the Battle of Stalingrad, the West had its doubts that the Soviet Union would survive. Okay. I mean, there was never the assumption, oh yeah, the Russians got this. Okay. There was never that.
No.
Even after Stalin ordered Zhukov to employ the Siberians to push back against Moscow, it was still in doubt. Okay. And I think the Germans were pushed back like 200 kilometers. Okay.
Right. That was very much
a significant push, but still, the jury was out. It took Stalingrad, where not only how did they see it? It was almost determined, definitively, the Soviet Union would not be defeated. Would it win the war? Yes. That's still another question.
That's another question.
Still another question. Yeah. So I think normally you and I have read too much about Stalingrad compared to people that are even interested in the topic, okay? There's some really good documentaries on YouTube, at least they were recently, on the battle. So I am for not renaming, but naming the city the Battle of Stalingrad, because I don't want to give it's putting too much focus on Stalin, which I don't think is appropriate. I think I've always looked at the Great Patriotic War as a people's war. The peoples of the Soviet Union fought to survive. Okay. Now there are plenty of historians that will say, Stalin played a key role and all that. That's fine. I'm not an expert. These people are, but it's more of a commemoration of the great struggle to survive and to push back this scourge of Nazi fascism, which is not in vogue these days. Okay, there's an amazing rehabilitation of Nazi Germany going on in the West. It's horrifying to me. So that's also one of the reasons why I would like to see it named the Battle of Stalingrad, because that's what it stood for. It stood for the possibility of victory.
I do agree with you, and I think that if one thinks of, you're absolutely right. The Battle of Moscow, the Germans were pushed back. They suffered a huge defeat. It was really the Wehrmacht's first defeat of the war. Nonetheless, 1942, when they mounted their offensive into the Caucasus to seize Russia, Russia's oil reserves, That looked like it's going to succeed, and that would actually knock the Soviet Union out of the war, because if it doesn't have access to its oil reserves, then that's it. Its war machine is at an end. So that was it was a very shrewd, very strategic move on the part of the Germans, not to go for Moscow again, but to move into the Caucasus. And so therefore, at Stalingrad, it was absolutely touch and go which way it was going to go.
And all the more so, the Volga River was the key conduit to get those resources up north. Okay, so if the Germans had, and they did at some point have both banks of the Volga,
sure.
And that's what makes it such a horrific, heroic story, because they just, I mean, there's film pictures of Hitler celebrating the victory in Stalingrad. Right. Okay, they thought it was 99% done. Let's celebrate, and that's what makes that story so inspiring. Okay, there was a film made, I guess it was called "Enemy at the Gates." Okay, which it's a pretty awful film because there were too many cooks in the kitchen on that one. The choreographing, the writing, and the directing, it wasn't a coalition of the willing. Let's put it that way. But there is a couple of scenes that are just they inspire awe. When the troops were bringing, it was a meat grinder. They were, and Soviet troops were being brought up to the riverbank, and they open up the door, and that choreography it was a cauldron. It was hell, and your chances of getting across that river pretty small, but you're going to do it. You're going to cross, and you're going to die trying. Okay, so I mean, it's so much of the DNA of Russian culture now it was about resistance. And I'm sorry to say, I don't want to get too political here right now, but resistant to the West.
Right. So that's right. But I mean, your idea is to rename it the Battle of Stalingrad, and that way do it. All attempts in the past, and there've been a number of these attempts to revert to the name of Stalingrad have failed. There've been no support for it, including and especially among the residents of yes. Volgograd. So, let alone in the rest of the country. It surprises me. I am surprised by the fact that the Russians are so unenthusiastic about restoring the name. If it were up to me, I'd say I think this is a really good idea. But I'm not sure that this is going to go down very well among the Russian people. So I suspect that this is going to continue 3-4 days a year. It's going to go back to its name, and then for the rest of the time, it's going to be Volgograd.
Well, there are two strange bedfellows here that are pushing it. Number one, it's the Chamber of Commerce of Volgograd, because I think it's a selling point.
It's a selling point. It is.
Yeah. Like made in Stalingrad. I mean, there's something to that marketing wise. Right. And it's the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, which, if that's their calling card, is sympathetic as, if I would be very curious if a pollster would ask the following question: are you against renaming the city Stalingrad? Instead of, are you for? Now, if you were to ask, are you against it? I think a lot of people go, what? No, I'm not against it. Right. I think that's where the middle ground is, because I don't think people are against it. But if you ask them, are you for it? And they think, the communists there, Zuganov, all these people, I think it turns them off. That's my impression.
Maybe so. I doubt whether the Russian government's going to get involved in this. I don't think Putin's going to get involved in this. I think and I think that's what they've done in the past. They've left it to local municipalities as to what they want to do, and so it has failed in the past. And indeed, all attempts even to put up memorials to Stalin have not been at all popular. I mean, there's really
it's been private initiatives.
Exactly.
You'll read this in like the Independent, or another Stalin statue. These are private initiatives. Right. These are not government initiatives. Okay. If a municipality wants to rename a street, seriously, folks, the Kremlin is not going to get involved in renaming.
No. They've made that very clear that they're not going to get involved in that. And I think then they have I seem to remember they had a mural, I think in a church, and the mural
But it was in Tbilisi.
was it? Yeah, yeah, was it Tbilisi? Yeah, there was the mural, and in the mural they had the war, obviously as part of Russian history, a mural commemorating Russian history, and in that mural they had Stalin commanding forces, and that raised a lot of but you'd have to think in terms of, I mean, Putin has been I mean, this is Stephen Cohen has made this point before that, no leader has actually condemned Stalin as vehemently as Putin has. I mean, there've been, of course, there was Khrushchev, but since Khrushchev, there hasn't been, and it was Putin who actually built the monument to Stalin's crimes, which Khrushchev didn't, which Brezhnev didn't, Gorbachev didn't, and Yeltsin didn't. It was Putin who built it, and the way at that opening, I can't remember what year it was when they opened it. Putin said that Stalin's crimes can never be forgiven or forgotten. I mean, so that's why it's so ridiculous, all the things that Putin wants to revive Stalin. So he's been the most explicit in just saying never forgiven nor forgotten.
But on the other hand, here is that the way Russians think about history, it's linear. Okay, should you destroy any evidence that Stalin was in power? That's just absurd. That's ridiculous,
Right.
because it's a learning moment. It's a moral moment. Okay, and it is a moment of great pain and suffering for so many people of the Soviet Union. But remembering it doesn't mean that you
Approve of it. Yeah.
thank you, approve of it. It's linear. It's there.
Right.
It's there. Okay.
Right.
And I can remember, this was like maybe 15 years ago. There were these nameless liberals in the West, that the people wanted to know what happened to their relatives during the purges and all of that, and they wanted to have their name. They wanted a pardon. They wanted to have, how do pardoning a dead person, does that mean anything? Well, maybe it means a lot to their descendants.
Right.
Okay. Who am I to judge? Okay. And so, now they're having trials of dead people in Russia. Oh my goodness, Beria is back and all of that. No, people wanted to know. The one thing the Bolsheviks did, they were very meticulous note takers. They took notes on everything and archived it. Okay. And if you have the right dates and names, you can find out what happened to your ancestors. Okay. And the government makes it available. I think they're preserving it digitally, okay, for posterity. It's linear, everyone. It's not to glorify. It's linear.
No, I think that's right. I think and I think that's the sensible approach, which is that well, history is what it is. It happened. You can't make it unhappen. It's there, and it's up to future generations to make of it what they will. And each generation interprets the past in different ways. So already, our generation or the subsequent generations interpret the Stalin era differently from the way the Khrushchev generation and the Gorbachev generation did. So that's it. And I think, and that's what Putin did. I mean, Putin, he opened up the historical archives, left everything. There's no restrictions at all, and pretty much left it to historians. Let historians interpret the past in whatever way they deem fit. He Putin wasn't going to get involved in that. He wasn't going to his own views on the past.
And if you look at the Khrushchev's de-Stalinization program, it's very, very selective, and it's very, very particular, because first of all, he didn't want the party to be criticized. Right. And of course, under muffled voices, when Khrushchev was doing this, it was, well, Nikita, what were you doing at the time? Okay. Right. And the generation that came into power, what was your role? See, they didn't want a discussion on that. Okay. Right. And even that's why Gorbachev wouldn't go there. Even Yeltsin wouldn't even go there. But for Putin, it's just like, it is what it
Right,
is.
that's right. No, that's right. That's it is. I mean, that's it because you can't unring the bell. I mean, it's like and anyway, unite America and slavery. I mean, what do you think of slavery? Well, okay, there's no point. I mean, it's there. It happened. It came to an end. You can then make of it what you will, but it's there's no point in just sort of continually condemning it because that isn't going to help. That's it's over. That it happened and it's over, and that's what's so bizarre that the people continually want to um, grind on about it. This is somehow this is an ongoing thing now. It's not. It happened in a particular historical moment. We can try to explain and understand that historical moment, but the moment is gone, and so there's no point in continuing to pretend that he's still here and that we're still somehow fighting against Stalin or whatever.
Well, I mean, when it's my favorite day of the year. It's called Dzień Pobiedy, Victory Day, and I always go into the center of the city. Sometimes I try to make it on Red Square, but the security is so tight, okay, and just a lot of people. But it's a commemoration of the fighting spirit of the men and women of the war. It's not about the Soviet Union per se. It's not about the Communist Party at all now. It's more it's a cathartic moment for society. And I think that's one reason why it's so popular. It's not militaristic as
No.
people say. That's so overdone. It's more about, and every year, and particularly this year is going to get a lot of attention because any more than 80 years to George, there's so few people left. Okay, and it's remembering the survivors. Okay, and their stories, and there's an enormous amount of pride about it. I mean, like I've never seen in my whole life in America.
Right, right. No, I think that's right. And I mean, it used to be. I mean, back in the day, the Soviet Union did have when they had the May the 9th, they would have the Red Army Parade, and it was a clear, a clear warning. Look what we have.
Look
You,
at our new missile. Yeah, right.
you don't want to mess with us. Look what happened to the last people who tried to mess with us. And so, but that isn't the case anymore. I mean, the Russians don't do that. Even before, the Ukraine thing. I mean, even before that, they didn't really do. Hey, look at how tough we are. No, I mean, I think that returning to the issue, I would favor it. I mean, I would think that it's something that is a part of the history. It's the name of one of the most famous battles in world history, and there's something peculiar. There's something weird about naming it something else. So there's somehow that people, and because again, many people just simply don't know it. I mean, well, what
Well,
is what is that city?
the German side and the Soviet side, independently each, lost more men than the Americans lost in the entire war. And we're talking about one battle. I mean, this was of a magnitude that's hard to comprehend. I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment. I mean, this was a epic battle that changed the course. I mean, in many ways, that battle determines is still determining of our existence today.
Right.
That's how important it is.
Right.
And there are those in the West that want to deny that. If it's not Stalingrad, then what is it about the Second World War?
Yeah.
What is it?
No, that's right. I mean, that without
I mean,
question.
you could say the Battle of Kursk, but then you're getting kind of
No,
wonky.
that was the turning point of the war. That because from then on, it was clear that Germany could not win the war. That was clear. However, nobody really knew how long the war would go on. I mean,
Well, Germany could be defeated.
right, but I don't think. Well, yes, I mean it's a question of yes, Germany could not win the war, but that doesn't mean that Germany would be defeated. I mean, Germany could retreat, It's a, hold strong defense lines, strong fortifications so that
Hold Ukraine. Hold
yeah,
Ukraine.
exactly. So that's right. They would the Germany wouldn't accomplish its wartime goals. So that became clear at Stalingrad that that you failed here. But that doesn't mean that they a shrewder leadership could not have retreated. And really, it came as a somewhat of a surprise. The final German collapse came as a surprise because I think people were expecting Germany essentially then to make wage the war sensibly, retreat, set up strong fortifications, and basically tell come on, come and get us, and therefore the war could just drag on for another 5 6 years. So in the end, the final collapse of Germany came as a little bit of a surprise. I don't think people were
Yeah, I
expecting after
mean,
43, 44 that Germany would collapse so soon.
and when you look at German war production, it peaked in 1944.
Right.
And George is on to something here. Retrench, keep Soviet Ukraine, keep the
Right.
Baltic republics, and say, we're done. We're done. And we don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about this. Hitler and Stalin met secretly. You've come across this conspiracy theory. But if things had played a little bit differently, I mean, what the Americans didn't come to our aid. The British, they've always been our eternal enemy.
Right.
I mean, we're going to defeat them, not the Nazis for the British and the Americans, not
Right.
for us. Okay, who knows? Who knows? But Stalingrad, the die was cast.
Right.
Okay, because they knew that they had a possibility of winning. They knew that there was a possibility that Nazi Germany could be defeated.
Right.
We've said so many times in this podcast is that from the vantage point of March 2025 and say, yep, that was the turning point. Well, look at how people looked at it then. The British were telling the Americans it's pretty dicey.
No. I think one way to during the wartime conferences, they weren't expecting the war to come to an end in 45. They thought it would go on to 46, 47, 48. They did not think then that it would end in 1945 because they still thought Germany had enormous resources. I mean, they had a brilliant army. They had brilliant generals, and that therefore they could absolutely set up sustainable defenses and continue the war. They couldn't win the war, but they could continue waging this war. So the collapse, the final total defeat, I think came as a surprise to the Allies.
Yeah, well, I don't know if this is just lore and propaganda, but George C. Patton, he saw it coming, and that's why give me enough fuel and I'll take Berlin. I don't know if that's just
Well, that's right, but all that was, of course, quite ridiculous. I mean, and that fueled a lot of the right-wing political movements in the United States in the 1950s, that there was a sellout and that apparently the Americans could have taken Eastern Europe. But I don't know how the Americans could have done it because essentially the Red Army had already moved into Eastern Europe in 1945.
But that wasn't an American war aim. That's what I would always say. The Americans didn't invade Normandy to liberate Eastern Europe. No, it went to defeat the military capacity of the German Nazi
That's right.
state.
So it was, it was Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. All of that was already taken by the Red Army. So I don't quite know the idea that Patton could have done very much. And the zones of occupation were worked out in the wartime conferences. So it was not like, well, you couldn't just ignore, the zones of occupation that had been determined by the political leaders. This is that everyone got a zone of occupation. So I don't know how, and Berlin was in the Soviet zone of occupation. So I don't quite know that, but this became, this whole legend during the 1950s, the John Birch Society, that somehow there was a sellout of Eastern Europe to Stalin. Which
I was brought up by Birch propaganda, John Birch propaganda. My parents were both members of the John Birch Society. My father was working on a state level. I mean, he was a big Bircher, and we had John Birch Society literature at home. So yeah, Yalta is Roosevelt, and it was very Republican because my father was a Republican. He did vote for Franklin Roosevelt during the war, as so many people did, because don't change horses in midstream. That was the phrase.
Right.
But that was the rear guard revenge against the New Deal, which my father's generation Republican, they all thought it was communism. That's what they call it. This is communism. That's what
Right.
they would call it. Seriously.
Yeah. But I always got to wonder, why would anyone want to vote in 1944 for Thomas Dewey? I mean, it's like we're thinking about Republicans. It's like I look at Thomas Dewey, he's a kind of the Mitt Romney of his era.
He was the first Mitt Romney. It's true. It's so true. No, I mean, no, I think that it's better to just finish the job under the current leadership at the time. It's interesting. My father's generation, they never really talked about Franklin Roosevelt directly. It was just that they were just a bunch of communists, okay, and the Soviets had infiltrated them. They were big believers in Joe McCarthy, and can you imagine what that did to me? How I was traumatized in my childhood. Anyway, I think we've come to a consensus here. Is George thinks it should revert back. I'm not against it. If I were to ask someone to ask my opinion, no one asked me, so I presented it. I would say the Battle of Stalingrad, because it's about the battle itself and about the soldiers and the civilians that survived that Holocaust catastrophe. So count me in, okay? But again, living here, everyone, no one's talking about it. It's not. No. It's not talked about. No. Other things are talked about.
No, that's right, and that's why all past attempts to revert to the name have fallen flat. There's just been no real support for it. So
if you ever come to Russia, please put on your itinerary, go to Volgograd and see the statue, the victory statue. It will blow your mind, because you get close to it. It is so vast that you can see the sky moving. It makes you feel like the soldiers that fought there. You're just so small, because the statue shows you the magnitude of what happened there, the magnitude of it. Okay, it was just something that is incomprehensible, and it really. I mean, you can look at this statue for hours from different points. It's so vast. And in the distance, it's very, very majestic. But the closer you get to it, it's much more menacing. It's very interesting how they designed it. Very smartly done. All right, everybody, nobody else is talking about this. Nobody else is talking about it. We are.
That's right, yeah. And that's the position that the dogs are taking. Yeah, we're the ones who are talking about it, and therefore we deserve everything into that tip jar. So if you have any coins, paper, cyber money, everything into the tip jar, because it's the dogs. They set the agenda. They're talking about things that no one else is talking about. They need remuneration. That's their favorite word, remuneration. So we're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve with the technology. And above all, the dogs will feel remunerated. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.